On a May morning in 1891, the Reverend Theodore Clifton ascended the pulpit of Calvary Presbyterian Church, a prosperous Grand Avenue congregation. Gazing out over his audience, the Reverend launched a scathing indictment of life in the city.
The cities are the cesspools where every form of wickedness concentrates, festers, and propagates itself. Bacchus is worshipped at about 1,300 saloons, 100 altars erected to the worship of God, and 1,300 of them to the worship of the devil. Every peril is here intensified. The perils of wealth, the perils of poverty, the perils of socialism, the perils of intemperance, the perils growing out of the foreign immigration, the perils of ignorance, and the perils of Romanism. No city in the land furnishes richer soil for all the evils of our modern civilization than Milwaukee. Looking over her temples, her palaces, and her hovels, Christ wept. Were he back in the flesh, and were he to approach our city by the lake or land, he would weep again.
The Reverend Mr. Clifton does not sound like someone you'd ask out for a beer. He was a Puritan through and through. But Clifton's sermon reminds us that the good old days exist only in hindsight. At the turn of the 20th century, Milwaukee faced problems that make some of the modern cities pale by comparison. Clifton mentioned class conflict and social unrest, intemperance and poverty. He was only scratching the surface.
Life itself was brutish and short at the turn of the century. Public health standards were appallingly low, and the average Milwaukeean's life expectancy at birth was a paltry 27.6 years. Children under 5 accounted for the majority of funerals in many neighborhoods. Pollution was part of the problem. Smokestacks and locomotives belched out thick clouds of coal smoke, making the air over Milwaukee dangerous to breathe. But smokestacks were symbols of prosperity. One reporter compared Bayview's iron mill, approvingly, to the volcano Vesuvius spewing smoke over the Bay of Naples. Garbage disposal was just as primitive. There was a time when Milwaukee simply towed its refuse out onto Lake Michigan and pushed it overboard. Problems with water quality were even more difficult to swallow. During the horse and buggy era, tons of manure plopped onto the city streets every day, and the next rain washed it to the nearest river. The result was water pollution of epic proportions. Here's a visitor's description of the Milwaukee River in 1881.
It is a narrow, tortuous stream, hemmed in by the unsightly rear ends of street buildings and all sorts of waste places. It is a currentless and yellowish, murky stream with water like oil and an odor combined of the effluvia of 100 sewers. Nothing could better illustrate the contaminations of city life than this vile and noxious compound here among the wharves.
In 1888, Milwaukee came up with a novel solution to the river nuisance. A tunnel was drilled under the east side, connecting Lake Michigan with the Milwaukee River just below the North Avenue Dam. The city then installed the world's largest water pump, a product of Milwaukee's own E.P. Alice Company. The pump, which still works, literally flushed the putrid river with clean lake water. The result of the flushing tunnel project was a cleaner river, but a dirtier lake. The problem, of course, was that the lake provided Milwaukee's drinking water. Long before anyone could spell cryptosporidium, the city suffered severe epidemics of a malady known, politely, as intestinal flu.
The old flushing station, now a popular coffee shop, was built as a monument to desperation. It solved one problem by creating another that was just as bad. But dirty air and dirty water had their parallels in another part of the city's life, dirty politics.
Milwaukee's new City Hall stood like a tower of civic strength in the heart of the downtown. Its lofty heights were deceptive. In an era of fast dealing and easy virtue, Milwaukee was just as crooked as any big city. The representative figure of the age was Mayor David S. Rose. Elected for the first time in 1898, he held the city's top office for 10 years. Rose was both an eyeful and an earful. Regally attired in Prince Albert coat and striped afternoon trousers, he campaigned for conventions, celebrations, and a live town. "I live to see my people at play and happy," the mayor once said. One of Rose's fondest desires was to put Milwaukee on the map, and the result was a thriving convention business. Visitors did not come to see the library and museum. Under All the Time Rosie, Milwaukee was a wide-open town where gambling dens, all-night saloons, and brothels operated in broad daylight. Prostitution flourished in the very shadow of City Hall. Mayor Rose justified his tolerance with an outlandish biology lesson.
Men are, and always have been, men. They have their natural passions, which in the great majority of cases must and will be gratified. If desires can be fed without turning the animal loose to destroy and ruin young girls, is it not better than to try to prevent what cannot be and never has been prevented?
The most famous of Milwaukee's madams, Kitty Williams, is immortalized in the Streets of Old Milwaukee exhibit at the Public Museum. Rose had plenty of company in the moral shallows. The Common Council was every bit as corrupt as the mayor. A council member once leveled this blast at a colleague: "Alderman Richards is of so little importance that he is not worth a cent to anybody to buy him." In the late 1800s, that may have been the worst thing one politician could say about another. Enough was eventually enough. In 1903, nearly 3,000 people jammed Turner Hall for a mass indignation meeting. Speaker after speaker blasted the brigade of grafters that ran both city and county, and they resolved to throw the rascals out. One speaker drew his inspiration from a well-known public works project. "What we want to do is to connect the flushing tunnel of politics with the lake of clear conscience and let it run through the putrid river of polluted politics and clean out the stream." The upshot was a round of grand jury investigations led by District Attorney Francis McGovern. By 1906, his juries had returned a grand total of 276 indictments against 83 public officials. David Rose was not among them. The mayor had skillfully covered his tracks. But McGovern blasted him as the self-elected, self-appointed Attorney General of crime in this community. Even his staunchest allies began to wonder how their mayor could afford to buy an Arizona copper mine on a $4,000 salary.
Here in City Hall, the politicians sensed a rising tide of reform. Even in the rosiest days of graft and corruption, there had been an undertow of discontent. In the early 1900s, that undertow became a flood. The old line parties, weighed down by scandal, could barely keep their heads above water. Milwaukee decided it was time to try something new. It was time for the Socialists.
Socialism was considered a radical philosophy in most American cities, something imported from Europe by men with dense beards and thick accents. In Milwaukee, socialism became a mainstream movement, and that made Milwaukee unique in all the nation. Few cities offered such fertile soil. Milwaukee had legions of industrial workers who had been seeking a political voice ever since the 8-hour uprising of 1886. The city was also a center of German liberal thought. The Turner Halls and Freethinker Societies, started by the famed 48ers, were the socialist movement's intellectual seedbeds. David Rose himself helped the cause. His administration offered a textbook example of how not to govern a city. But socialist theory on its own wouldn't get the job done. The movement needed a Moses, someone who could translate its philosophical fine print into a program and lead the faithful to the promised land. Victor Berger was that Moses. Born in Austria, Berger came to Milwaukee in 1881 and worked variously as a tutor, drama critic, and German teacher. In 1892, he became a full-time socialist, launching a newspaper and leading a political movement. Victor Berger believed devoutly in the cooperative commonwealth of socialist theory, that glorious day when workers would own the means of production. But he believed it wouldn't come until the public was educated to desire it.
How better to educate than by running for office? Berger campaigned for real-world reforms, slum clearance, free health care, better sewage treatment. He saw reforms as steps on the road to true socialism. Some comrades out east began to call the Milwaukee group sewer socialists. But the point was to govern. Like David Rose, Victor Berger wanted to win elections. He developed a strategy called the Milwaukee idea, a personal union between the socialist movement and the labor movement. Before long, the leaders of both groups were the same people.
The socialists began to field candidates in the 1898 elections. The first results were dismal, but Berger and his comrades were in no hurry. One of the party's most effective tools was the legendary Bundle Brigade. Within 48 hours, an army of Union volunteers could distribute literature to every house in Milwaukee on any issue in any language desired. Year by year, the socialist tide rose. In 1904, the party's ticket, headed by Berger himself, captured 25% of the mayoral vote and 9 seats on the Common Council. David Rose expressed concern.
While we have slept, an enemy, cunning and insidious, has crept into our midst to poison the vitals of our civic body.
Rose called Berger himself a disciple of Satan, whose goal was to substitute the red flag of anarchy for the glorious old emblem of our country. Rose was red-baiting, but the voters didn't bite. The socialists on the council were a welcome change from the usual hacks and grafters. Berger often declared that honesty was the highest quality most politicians could hope to attain. With us, he bragged, this is the first and smallest requirement. Diligent, creative, and incorruptible, the socialists earned the trust of Milwaukee's voters. By 1908, they came within 2,000 votes of unseating David Rose himself. In 1910, finally, victory was complete. For the first and only time in American history, voters of a major city turned their entire government over to socialists. Emil Seidel, a pattern maker by trade, became Milwaukee's mayor. Victor Berger went to Congress. Socialists won a 2/3 majority on the Common Council and more than half the seats on the county board. After years of darkness, the party faithful were certain that a new day had dawned.
The landslide of 1910 was a triumph for the working men and women of Milwaukee. Most of the aldermen who sat in this chamber worked with their hands. Ever since the Bayview shootings of 1886, workers have been searching for their collective voice. Now they had found it. The ethnic industrial character of the city, so obvious for so long, had finally found mature political expression, and Milwaukee has never been the same.